Aloha. Welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. Interviews with people who have special insights into education from preschool all the way through higher education. I'm Jim Shon, your host, and today we're exploring a coalition of institutions that are movers, shakers, and reformers. My guest is Cheri Nakamura, the coordinator of this coalition, which is called He'e, which means in Hawaiian?
It means octopus in Hawaiian, but the acronym stands for Hui, for Excellence in Education.
Okay, and you have this coalition of, 40 or more organizations that are listed on your website?
Yes, that's correct. It's an organizational membership, and most of them are community organizations, parent groups, community organizations that deal with families. And we have all come together to, first of all, look at improving family engagement. That was sort of the impetus for getting together. But we spent the last few years focusing on education policy advocacy.
Okay, so name some of your well-known, coalition participants.
Okay, well, for parent groups, we have a group called Parents for Public School Hawaii. They are some of the parents that were very active during the furloughs. We have the Hawaii State PTSA. We have a group called FACE, which stands for Faith Action for Community Equity. They're a faith-based community organization that does advocacy. In Peace, which is a community organization that deals with Native Hawaiian families, more focusing on preschool level children and education. We also have Parents and Children Together. They're a community organization that works with the Micronesian Pacific Islander community. So it's a diverse group, and we're happy to get them together to focus in on public education issues.
So you mentioned the furloughs. Were the furloughs a kind of stimulus for either forming or inspiring or growing your coalition?
That's right. The furloughs were the first it was the impetus or the catalyst which got these organizations together. Before the furloughs, actually when I first joined the Learning Coalition, which is the sponsor of He'e Coalition, one of the things that I was tasked to do was to look around the landscape to see if there were active parents or family engagement at schools. And so I did a bit of work just understanding what a PCNC was and a school community. But when the furloughs happened, I think it's the first time that parents really sort of woke up and thought, hey, what are our policymakers doing? And maybe we should have a say. So I recall at the time of furloughs, there were a lot of parent groups that sort of appeared at the Capitol. They wanted to meet the governor, the Board of Education, but it was a bit fragmented. There were different groups of parents. But as the furlough sort of resolved itself, the Learning Coalition went to the community and said, maybe it would be a good idea, or is it a good idea to form a collective entity so that for future issues you could work together? And the community said, yes, we'd like that. So it was the furloughs that got, I think, parents and families to really pay attention to what our policymakers are doing, and the coalition was an extension of that.
Well, your organization and you are known for testifying a lot at the legislature.
Right.
So it sounds like there's a journey here that has been stimulated by events. So
Right.
How did you get involved with the Learning Coalition and He'e?
Right. So my background was not in education. I was actually working in private industry. I was working in the finance industry, actually. But I think it was probably a time for me to reevaluate my career, and especially after the stock markets fell in 2008.
Many reevaluations.
Right. So I was introduced to the Learning Coalition and was fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get involved. At the time, the Learning Coalition, whose mission is to improve or increase family and community engagement. They didn't have any staff at the time, and so I was asked if I were interested in sort of looking at this landscape and seeing if community work was something that I wanted to try. And so I'm very grateful for that opportunity because that was 5 years ago, and not really knowing much about community work or education, perhaps I had a fresh set of eyes. And so I've been able to learn a lot about our public education system, about some of the needs or the wants of community with respect to education. And now that I'm involved with sort of policy advocacy, I've built relationships with the department and with our policymakers. So I'm so happy that I've made this transition.
So you come from a non-educational
Yes.
realm, right? So what surprised you or interested you or particularly stands out as, wow, I didn't know that, from when you were, in finance and now you're deeply involved with education policy?
Right. Well, I think if you're not familiar with our education system, there's a lot that you take for granted, perhaps, especially the wonderful teaching, the wonderful teachers and administrators out there that are working extremely hard every day to educate our children and really work for our children. And so I appreciate that greatly now that I've seen it in person. When you're away from it, you really don't know. And perhaps you're informed by the media, or which sometimes likes to talk about things that aren't going well. But I think I've realized that there are many things that are going very well in our education system. The other thing that I think I've been surprised about is that because it is a public system, a lot of parties are involved. And the funding for education comes from our state and is controlled by our legislature. So it's not just the education department, it's many other stakeholders involved. And so I didn't realize how many stakeholders there were participating. And so now that I'm involved in the system, I can see how it's difficult to get everybody on the same page sometimes. But the value that I think I have learned from all of this experience, I go to the more aware of who's at hand, whereas I think when I was working in private industry, I knew, but not at such a deep level. And so I'm very glad to participate as a voter now, because I'm pretty aware of the things I'm voting for and who I'm voting for. Yes.
With so many stakeholders and a complex system and a private sector that's dimly aware but not really, seems like communicating just basic information becomes an important function of, I assume, your coalition and the coalition sharing, members sharing with each other.
Definitely. I try to inform our members of what's going on in the education to the extent that I'm aware. And I try to build relationships with the Department of Education so I can bring speakers in to inform our community members of the initiatives that are going on. At the same time, I try to inform the education leaders who I deal with some of the wants of the community. So this information exchange, it is really a two-way exchange, I think, that's necessary to have a mutual understanding. It's not just with the people at the Department of Education, but also our policymakers. So this information exchange is critical. And as a coalition director, I also try to keep our members updated with email news updates to make sure that at least people are aware of some of these important issues that are going on.
So you have a process where you have voting members.
Yes.
You take stances. You are advocates.
Yes.
You're not just a switchboard of information.
No, that's correct. So actually, the way it works is we have monthly meetings, and anybody can participate in these meetings. It's open to anyone. Our membership is organizational, but we also have individuals who come and participate. So when it's discussing about issues we want to support or oppose or things that are important to the coalition members, everyone can participate. And based on those conversations, if legislation comes up or if board policy comes up where our coalition members are interested, then we can offer the coalition members to take a stance on it. And at that time, it's the voting members who have sort of the final say. So we have about 15 voting members.
They're organizations.
Organizations,
Right.
That's correct. They're
Yeah.
organizations, and we have representatives from the organizations who participate in our meetings, so they can go back to their organizations and sort of inform their members. But when an issue is brought up, it's discussed by everyone, but then when it comes to the final sort of decision of whether or not the coalition is going to sponsor it, then the voting members will have to have a supermajority of 75% in order for a coalition stamp to be put on that particular issue.
Okay, so I'll ask the sort of public question. So what? What positions have you taken that I, as just an average person out there, would say, oh, I know about that, you know?
Well, perhaps the most visible issue would be the instructional hour issue. And that was a law that was passed, I believe it was in 2009, as a result of the furloughs. So the coalition hadn't been formed at the time, but going back to what I mentioned about the furlough Fridays and how parents were upset with the situation, a couple of parents went so far as to do research looking at other states to see what other states had in terms of instructional time and whether or not there were rules or statutes, and found that most other states have a law on minimum days and minimum instructional time. So a law was created partly as a response to the furloughs, because I think everyone realized that they didn't want the situation to happen again. And after that, our coalition did form, and I think our members were also in support because they didn't want furloughs to happen again. And for people who are not familiar with that legislation, it went through a number of years of because the law was difficult to implement. And
Well,
so,
the one thing, I want to get into that in depth
Oh,
a
okay,
little
yes,
bit,
all right,
but I was curious about, this is actually a community-driven
that's right.
research, poking around.
That's right.
Finding out what else is going on. So you're kind of mobilizing resources out there that are basically free to the public,
That's right, that's right. You're right, it was an issue that was generated from the public.
Right.
And the public, the parents who went ahead and did the work on the research, yes, did it on their own volition and advocated to policymakers, and a law was formed. So it really was sort of a democratic process, and I think our coalition was supportive of that effort, particularly because we came together, the coalition came together sort of as a response to the furloughs.
So you had the furlough stimulus, you had this community-based research relating to how many hours of instruction a student gets every day.
That's right.
And throughout the year. But you also have taken positions on other issues, have you not?
Yes, we have. At the legislature, we've commented on things like early education.
Early education.
There have been, last year we helped support the support for teachers, the nationally certified reward for a teacher being nationally certified. We've also commented on things like 21st century schools.
Okay. Wow.
So we've taken issues, we've looked at a broad range of issues, and even though our coalition came together for family engagement, I think the members are concerned about many aspects surrounding education.
Very well. Well, we've been talking with Cheri Nakamura about her Octopussy kind of coalition
Right,
with
the
all
networking.
these tentacles and community-based research. And we're going to delve a little bit deeper into some of these issues. We'll be back in 1 minute.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, how you doing? I'm Gordo the Tech Czar, here on ThinkTech Hawaii, where we co-host Hibachi Talk, where we talk about technology and bring in all kinds of cool guests. Also, my co-host with me today is
Andrew the security guy. Thanks for watching. Thanks for watching ThinkTech Hawaii, and thanks for watching Hibachi Talk. We also have Angus.
And you there, lad? It's Angus. I bring in all kinds of wee things. Oh, look, you can see my lips moving.
Welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, Reformers. We're talking with Cheri Nakamura, who coordinates this whole amazing group of stakeholders who are interested in education on many levels. And we had just begun to talk a little bit about this idea of instructional time.
Yes.
Which is how much time per day, I suppose per week, and how many days in the year.
That's right.
Walk us through some of the ideas, issues, and challenges of just wading into that.
Okay. Well, as I mentioned before, I think the whole idea behind having a law was so that furlough Fridays wouldn't happen again. I think the community was upset with the situation that 17 of our school days were taken away.
Now, there is in the collective bargaining agreement an agreement for no more than so many hours to be taught by a Unit 5 teacher, right? And
That is true.
often referred to as instructional time or sometimes seat time or whatever. So there was something there, but it had not risen to the level of a state law. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I think, and I don't want to misspeak, but my understanding is the teacher's contract has a set time for teacher instructional time. But the instructional hour law was looking at the instructional time for students. And there wasn't a minimum for that. So, and in addition, there wasn't a minimum amount of school days as a law or a rule. And because there was no law, furloughs happened. And so the idea was we need to put something in place so that furloughs wouldn't happen again to the extent that it did. And so the two parents who advocated for the law did a lot of legwork by looking at our states on the mainland, all of the other states, and found that I think all other states have some kind of statute in place, whether it's days, minimum days, or minimum instructional time.
And is there a national average?
I believe for elementary school, it's 6 hours, and for secondary schools, it's 6.5 hours. That said, there are states that interpret instructional hours differently than Hawaii does. And I think one of the issues is the specific definition that the union defines for their teachers in terms of teacher instructional time. So there was a misalignment or misalignment of definitions, which was one of the challenges. Because if you look at other states, most of the other states, meet this minimum average, and they do it, and they've done it for a long time, it seems, without much problem. But in Hawaii, when the law was implemented, it seemed like there were a lot of challenges at the school level to implement it.
So is one concern maybe the length of that school day and maybe being too short? And I know Wednesdays you see children of all ages walking the streets at 1:30 or 2 in the afternoon. Is that an issue that drove the coalition as well?
I think when the law was passed or being evaluated, there were assessments of our schools, and it seemed like some schools were allowing students to leave early on a Wednesday, for example, earlier than the 1:30 or the 1 o'clock, or I'm not quite sure, I guess it depends on the school, but there were some schools that seemed to have shorter hours than others, and it was not equitable. So because there was no minimum, while there was a minimum of teaching instructional time, there wasn't a minimum for student instructional time, so therefore you had inequity in our state, and we are one state, one district, and so it didn't seem that the equity was being maintained in terms of student instructional hour. So that was a big factor.
Could the Board of Ed have initiated this independent of the legislature, you think?
I think it's possible, yes.
Yes. And it wouldn't be the first time, because I know the weighted formula and other issues like that were in part a legislative response to a decision of the board not to do it.
I see, yes. So there is that dynamic, things that can be, what issues can be decided by the board and what issues can be decided by the legislature. I think in this situation, maybe because the furloughs was such was an issue that was very visible, that the legislature took it upon themselves to create a law.
So in this case, you had collective bargaining, the unions that wanted to ensure that teachers were paid for the time
Right,
that they were teaching. You had the families and students
right,
who were concerned that not only are some getting more than me, but are we getting enough?
right.
And you also had the legislature that's listening to the community and saying, wait a minute, maybe we should have a standard here that sets the bar high.
That's correct.
And you were kind of successful over time, were you not?
Well, I think that the argument that minimum, I think that nobody wanted furloughs to happen again.
Right, okay.
And I do believe that the equity issue was a factor as well. that we want our schools to have, we want our students to have equity in terms of time at school, learning. And I think that looking at the average across the nation, I mean, that also is a factor. I know that Hawaii is unique in many ways, but if you can look across to the mainland and say, well, the average there is this, then people think that, well, you know, we should be a part of that pact as well, or if not, just be the average, but hopefully be above average. I think that's what we would want to strive for. So those factors were, I believe, important for having the law be maintained, yes.
So the law has so many instructional days or
Yes,
days in which students are in school.
that's right.
How many is that right now?
I think it's 180.
180, right? It also has instructional hours per year? Is that?
Yes, hours per year.
And how does that,
Well, so there have been, over the years since the law was implemented, there have been some negotiation around this law, and I think something this past legislative session happened, which hopefully has made all parties come to a compromise on how to handle the situation. And that compromise last year was or this past session was to change instructional hour to student hours, meaning that the hours, all hours at school counted as part of this minimum time. And this way, the schools hopefully have the flexibility to arrange their schedules to best fit student learning. Meanwhile, you're still maintaining a minimum standard, which is comparable to a mainland standard. And you also have a minimum amount of days, so that furloughs, to the extent that it happened in 2009, would not happen again.
now I recall in some of the hearings, there was concern that a standard that was set maybe a year or so ago could not be met and was expensive.
That's right. So because of the technical aspects of our teacher's contract, part of the law, when it was designed, had different steps of how you're going to implement increases in instructional time, because the idea was you were going to start with a base, but then you would add instructional time because we want to have more time for learning for our students. But because of collective bargaining negotiations, to reach that final level of increased hours would have created more money needing to be paid to teachers. And the collective bargaining, the contract wasn't enough to supply that amount for the next level up. So it was something that I think everybody had on their minds and wanted to try to resolve.
So no law is perfect when it's passed,
That's correct.
and people garner their resources to try to change it in their
Yes.
interests.
Yes.
And there's always a financial cost to public education usually anyway. So are you kind of confident that right now we have, 180 days? And what's the number of hours sitting there for student instructional time now?
I believe it is what was cited as the average for the nation. So it's 6 hours at elementary school
Okay,
and 6.5 hours at the secondary level. I hope I'm not misspeaking, but that's what I believe it is.
but there's an aggregate number per year, isn't it? Like about 1,000 hours a year or something like that?
I think it's 1,080
1,080.
for secondary schools and 990 at elementary schools.
So that's our goal, and we'll see
That's right.
how that spins itself out.
That's right.
We've been talking with Cheri Nakamura, about one of the most interesting issues that crosses lots of stakeholders, steps on many stakeholders' toes, offers information, opportunity for students. We'll be back in 1 minute.
Okay, this is ThinkTech Hawaii, and it's Wednesday. Every Wednesday is Energy Wednesday here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5 p.m. every Wednesday. Come and listen to us. And just to show you what I mean, I'm going to ask Sharon to tell us more.
Come and see us every Wednesday, as Jay said. And we have people like Jim Albers from HECO here and co-host Ray Starling here every Wednesday. We not only go on Olelo and OC16, but also stream live. So please come visit us, hear about the latest in clean energy.
Okay, Jim, you've been here. You got any comment on all this?
As important as energy is in all of our lives today, this is a great forum and a great format to vet those issues. So I encourage everybody to listen in and participate.
Okay, Ray, what do you think for a close?
Well, I think this is the greatest show in the energy world here in Hawaii. You can come here every week, 1 hour, and catch the latest on what's happening and hear from the people who really know what's going on, like Jim Alberts. We appreciate your coming today.
Thank you.
Ray Starling, Sharon Moriwaki, Jim Alberts, and Jay Fidel here in Hawaii, the state of clean energy, 4 to 5
Aloha.
p.m. Wednesday. Aloha.
Aloha.
Welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Education Movers, Shakers, and Reformers. We're talking with Cheri Nakamura, who is a coalition leader among coalition-type groups.
That's right.
And we were talking about this very complex issue of instructional and student time. But you had mentioned during the break that actually your coalition negotiated with the teachers union over how to solve this problem, at least temporarily. Is that right?
Well, I don't know if negotiate is the correct term, but we were certainly able to have a discussion and at least come to some kind of understanding with each other. In a number of years past, we had been pretty far apart on our views on instructional hours. But last year, I think, particularly because this pressure of going to the next level of the law and collective bargaining and funding, because there was a lot of pressure to try to resolve this before it couldn't be resolved anymore, we were able to get together and have a very collaborative discussion on our positions and come to sort of an agreement on how to give schools the flexibility while maintaining the minimum.
So part of the takeaway I'm hearing is that if you're well organized,
Yeah.
you know what you're talking about,
Yes.
you will be taken seriously. And parents and community groups can be part of any intense discussion,
Yes.
and people will pay attention to you.
I think it's the idea of working collaboratively. And I think our members really believe in that. That's why they formed a coalition in the first place, to work collaboratively together. But it's also working collaboratively with other groups. And I really believe that because we have that value, that we're able to at least work in that direction, and hopefully it can lead to sort of positive outcomes.
For those that are cynical about democracy, sometimes we think about it as only voting, but you and your coalition have demonstrated that it's also can be issue-oriented,
Yep.
and you can engage people in very meaningful and productive discussions. And of course, you've also had legislators who were very interested in this as well.
Yes, I think everybody was interested in trying to resolve this particular issue. And so we were all working together to try to come to a resolution. Yeah. But it's not just this issue. There are other issues that we can work with, and it's not just necessarily the HSTA, but we hope to work with many groups on many other issues with the same kind of collaborative feeling so that we can move forward. Yeah.
I see you also on your website should go to
.org.
.org, right? You also have a group working on the policies that the Board of Education is reviewing,
That's right.
changing, creating. What is it like? I mean, the legislature, they meet just, in 4 months. It's very intense. If you miss the deadline, too bad, right? And they are there full-time for that period of time. But the Board of Ed is part-time.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about how working with the Ledge is different, maybe, than working with the State Board of Education, which has a lot of policy.
Well, the Board of Education right now is, in the past 2 years, they had a special permitted interaction group review all of the policies that had existed up to that time. That group did a policy review, and they took out the ones they felt that weren't necessary anymore, combined them, consolidated them, revised them, and now they're ready to bring these policies to a public forum. And we've been following some of these policies. In particular, there was a policy recently passed, which is newly titled Family and Community Engagement / Partnership, which is what the coalition came together for. So it's similar to advocacy at the legislature in that, you have an issue. In terms of our process, we have a policy issue or policy language that we want to take back to our members, and maybe we want to review it more in depth. We do some research. In this case, for the family engagement policy, we recommended some language, as well as we got other stakeholders together from the special education world and other groups that are dealing with families to look at this family engagement policy. And we got together, we did work, and we made some recommendations to the board, and we worked together to try to come up with a policy that we could all agree with. It took, you're right, in the legislative session, it's only the 3 months, and you're pretty focused in on that time. At the board, it's a little more, it took more time for this particular policy, but it finally came to public hearing, and we were able to comment, but we were involved in the whole process. So it is a vested time and interest to follow something like this, but our members are committed, and I think providing our voice has been beneficial for us, and we hope that it's been beneficial for the board as well.
Well, for those who are watching and wondering, what are you talking about policy? You actually can go to the State Board of Education's website, and under policies, you will see dozens and dozens and dozens of rules that they adopt for the public DOE schools.
Yes.
And it has to do with school lunches and
Transportation,
and
school discipline.
School discipline. This has
Yep.
been in the news. Civil Beat just had an article on how suspensions seem to be falling on a particular set of ethnic groups more than others. Just about anything you'd be interested in how the school system runs flows through a policy as well as state law. But I did want to go a little bit beyond this. A lot of ideas come through your stakeholders and your meetings, and you were mentioning that there's a kind of international thing emerging with Hawaii, perhaps us being leaders.
Yes.
But you went on an international trip with the Teacher of the Year of Hawaii. Talk a little bit about that and what it was about.
Yes, this was a little bit separate from the coalition work that we do in terms of advocacy, but I did meet a couple of teachers a few years back, Chad Miller and Amber Makayao. And Chad Miller was the State Teacher of the Year in 2012 and was teaching at Kailua High School, and did a method called Philosophy for Children, or P4C, and it's being implemented in a number of schools in our state, a number of public schools, and it has a long history at Waikiki School.
Which is an elementary school.
Elementary school.
So we usually don't think about philosophy in 5 and 6 and 7-year-olds. Yes.
We usually don't, that's correct. But this method is actually very appropriate for the elementary level because children have a very natural sense of wonderment. They question and they wonder why things happen. And so it's a pedagogy, it's a method to deliver education, and Waikiki School has been doing it for a long time, and this year's Teacher of the Year, Catherine Kane, utilizes it in her class. And interestingly, there is a Japanese foundation called the Uehiro Foundation for Ethics in Education. It's a large philanthropic organization in Japan, but they actually found P4C Hawaii and believe that it's important for Japanese education. So they've actually invested in the University of Hawaii. An academy was formed called the Uehiro Academy for Philosophy and Ethics in Education. And it's actually a department in the philosophy department. And Chad Miller and Amber Makayao, who were teachers at Kailua, are now part of the academy, and they're doing some research and professional development in the method. And they do these exchanges with Japan. And so in my previous life, I lived in Japan and I studied Japanese. And I was introduced to the group, and I actually had Chad Miller come and talk about P4C to our coalition members a few years ago. But then I learned that they do these Japanese exchanges, and so I just casually said, oh, I speak Japanese, and if you ever need some help with translation, please let me know. And so last year in August, they had some teachers come from Japan to visit Waikiki School and Kailua Elementary at Waimanalo in elementary and intermediate. These are where the philosophy for children method is being implemented. And I helped with the translation. And so this year, I was able to go with the Hawaii teachers to Japan because they're implementing it in an area, the city of Sendai, which is where the earthquake and tsunami hit. And these teachers and the College of Education there is very much invested in trying to have this method be implemented in Japan, because it is something that Japanese education doesn't have.
It just shows that a coalition of community people
Yes.
interested in education can have an impact on our rules, our laws,
Yep,
our policies, and an impact overseas.
definitely.
And we've only begun to sort of explore that, and I really thank you for being on the show, because you give hope to a lot of folks who feel, who am I, this little person, and there are all these organizations and this coalition that is making a real impact on education. You've been watching ThinkTech Hawaii's Movers, Shakers, Reformers, talking with Cheri Nakamura. We'll be back next week, streaming live, noon on Wednesday. Aloha.